Hello, my friends. This is episode 21. It is a series that I am doing. There's been 20 previous episodes of this series that I am telling the story of my struggles with mental health, my struggles with making terrible choices in how I dealt with my mental health issue, and then ultimately God coming in on the scene, correcting all my bad decisions and choices, though I live with the consequences of many of those bad choices. But nevertheless, he came in, he corrected my terrible lifestyle, he got me the help that I needed, the correct way of dealing with my mental health. So this is what all these stories are all about. Glorifying God and showing that you can deal with your mental health. For those of you that struggle with mental health, you can deal with it the right way and don't do it the wrong way like I did. So, all right, that's a terrible rambling start to all this. I'm just going to jump right in and kind of give a disclaimer, this story may not be for some audiences. Most of my stories really aren't. Let's just be honest with ourselves here. This one is a bit dirty in the sense that griminess and grossness, and to the extent of how badly I had wandered off the path, and how let me just get at it, okay? You got it. This is going to be not the most pleasant story. As I did last time, I am continuing to make a very concerted effort to not be overly descriptive about the drugs I did or the experiences those various varieties brought. Just know that I did a lot of drugs, a lot of different kinds. Obviously, my original promise I made to myself months ago was null and void. If you remember in a previous story, I said I would never delve into the nastier, more life-destroying drugs. Well, since I was now a meth addict, there was no reason to keep that promise, so I altered it. That seems logical, right? That's coming from a logical place in a drug messed up brain. Let's alter the promise. I could tell I was completely gone at this point, so I'm like, this is stupid. I'm not keeping this pretense anymore. But also partly to do with that pizza delivery I made to the church. I told it back in a couple stories. I now, without a shadow of doubt, knew that my time in Denver was winding down, but you know what? I'm going to go out with a bang. I told myself that I was never going to say no to any other drug that was ever put in front of me. This is my new promise I made to myself. Before it was nothing but pot and possibly some mushrooms. Now I'm saying, I'm not going to say no to anything. The only thing I would never do was jam a needle in my arm. That was the one stipulation I held to. Well, that stipulation did not last long because needles did eventually find their way into my veins, but I'm going to kind of touch on that at the end of the story. To this day, remember I said I'm not going to say no to anything. I am so thankful that heroin was not an in drug in Denver at this point, because I 100% stayed true to my promise. Somebody handed something to me, okay. I never said no. Absolutely never said no. Thankfully, again, the only person I knew that did heroin, he never offered it to me. So, my little stipulation there, never saying no, still applies because he never offered it to me. He was going to share any of his heroin, but again, you get the point. No heroin. Thankful for that. So I tell all this unpleasantness because after April and I had lost Hank as our meth hookup, we had a really hard time for a little bit finding another reliable source. So we were stuck doing whatever drug we could get our hands on. The reason why we could not find a reliable source is because April was incredibly picky. She was basically a meth snob. That's a great title to put on your business card. I'm a meth snob. She got really spoiled by Hank because he had super potent high-grade meth. April assured me that I never wanted to mess with any of the bathtub garbage that was so easy to find. I was new to this whole crazy scene, so I'm like, whatever you say, April, whatever. Eventually, April reacquainted herself with an old high school friend, and I'm going to call him Adam. Adam He quickly became my very best male friend for those final 6 months of my time in Denver. He was just so incredibly laid back, and he was funny and interesting, told interesting stories. He just made everything be at ease. He's just such a mellow dude to be around. I thoroughly enjoyed hanging out with him. Adam also happened to be a major player in the Denver drug scene. He had a whole lot of connections, not just in Denver, but pretty much for the entire state of Colorado and some of the surrounding states. It wasn't so much that he was like this stereotypical big time, dealer with fat rolls of cash in his pocket. It was just they had access to the vast network of underground drugs that went all throughout. If he could not locate what you were looking for, it was not in Colorado. This guy, if he wanted to, he could bring down major operations if the cops ever put the squeeze on him. He was basically a walking little black book of drug dealers. He knew everything. So Adam quickly solved our meth dilemma and got us several new hookups to choose from. So our short stint of trying whatever we could get our hands on, it was over. But the problem was we now had a taste of familiarity with all those other different drugs. So there'd be times we were bored and wanted to add something to the meth craziness, and we'd go out and seek them. So we're not just meth addicts. Now we're addicts of lots of other things, and things were definitely getting out of control. My previous settled repose that I was eventually leaving and heading back to New York, it went by the wayside quickly. I began to actively attempt to thwart God's intentions of rescuing me. I was constantly trying to do whatever I could to run from him. It was out of control. It was so ridiculous. There's just so many different things I could tell, examples of this habit of mine, trying to thwart, to manipulate God. But I'm not getting into this. This story is grimy enough as it is. So I told a different story that April was this gifted hairstylist. She was very good at what she did. So she had a lot of contacts and a lot of different friends. Because of all these contacts and friends and me introducing to all these friends, it's similar to my comment I made in the last story about how, tattoo parlors in Denver were like perfect fronts for drugs. I found out quickly that hairstylists in Denver, many of them were just total drug addicts, very much into the drug scene. We're not talking a little bit of pot on the weekends. We're talking full-blown drug addicts that were somehow functioning in polite society. Her manager, being one of those key people, he had access to this entirely different world that neither of us, April or I, had ever witnessed or even knew existed. I rarely go into detail about this very specific part of my Denver story, and I'm definitely not doing it now. Just know that this new world that her manager opened up to us was beyond dark. The demonic activity swirling around this scene, it was palpable. It was impossible to miss it. I truly wish I could forget some of the things that I saw and learned, but part of the consequences of my choices, so I do my best to not think about them, which is why I typically don't go into the details. So as I said, I'm gonna make this story a little bit shorter. I just wanted to set up how badly I'd fallen down the rabbit hole at this point, so that when I do finally tell of God rescuing me, the obviousness of how vastly gone I was to juxtapose, I'm not going to try to say that word again, to just kind of show how bad I was and how much bigger and more powerful God was to correct me and change me and redirect me and rewire my brain, because that is vastly more amazing and exciting than hearing about these drug stories. So I'm laying the groundwork for this, and I'm going to finish this up by talking about my introduction to needles. One of Adam's contacts was an exclusive needle user for meth. He never got meth into his system any other way. For him, it was a waste of time and resources. Why settle for 50% of the drug when you get 100% of the drug in your system? he had this fancy like syringe carrying case that always went with him everywhere he went. The dude was a nut. He would also go on these long binges, and then he would just fall off the face of the map because he was recovering from being up days on end in those long binges. This frustrated April and I to no end because he absolutely had the very best meth in town. We made him our sole provider. If we didn't plan accordingly around his downtime, we'd be stuck having to get our hands on less than quality stuff until he turned his phone back on, dragged himself out of bed, and started dealing again. I don't exactly remember the circumstance. We were hanging out with this guy a lot, but he eventually convinced April that she needed to stop messing around with smoking meth and just go straight for her vein. But like any normal, sane person, she was scared of getting AIDS from a dirty needle. He was like, well, yeah, duh. That's the number one rule for needle users. Don't share your needle, idiot. She was like, okay, fine, but I'm not about to go get some fancy rig like you got. He's like, April, you can go to any pharmacy and ask for free needles, and they have to give them to you by law without question. I could almost see the little cartoon light bulb blink on above her head. We left his apartment, went right to the pharmacy to see if he was lying. Sure enough, he wasn't. He was absolutely right. They handed over a package of 10 disposable needles without any question, apart from a raised eyebrow because they knew what was going on here. We weren't obviously, diabetes. So we take these needles back to the guy, and he shows her how to do it without killing herself because she jammed an air bubble in her vein. I remember sitting on the couch, I was kind of watching her do this, and I'm like, ugh, gross. I wanted nothing to do with it. However, her enthusiastic insistence that I get over it and try it, it quickly convinced me to obliterate my final remaining one last rule. I immediately understood the attraction. It was all consuming. Just like that, April and I, we were instant needle freaks. 3 times a day at least was our new routine. Looking back, I recognize the sheer gross dirtiness of this whole scene. And thankfully, all praise to God, he was not going to wait till I got home to correct my needle usage. It only took about 2 weeks before, interestingly, God worked through April to convince her to pull us off this runaway train we were on. She suddenly became very skeeved out by this whole disgusting scene and realized that she didn't want to go down this path anymore. She wanted nothing to do with it. So made a promise to each other that this is it, we're done, we're not doing it again. And we kept that promise. We never again put a needle in our arms that time I was there. So, all right. That's it. Like I said, this is a short one, so I'm gonna finish this out differently than I normally do. I want to encourage you who are listening, who you may not be a disgusting drug addicted needle user like I was, but that doesn't mean that you are any less in need of God's saving grace. There are many upstanding, moral, religious folks who think they're doing okay, that they go and give to the poor, and they occasionally volunteer on Thanksgiving or Christmas to feed the hungry or whatever. There's even some who go to church, who faithfully go to church, but yet are far away from God, who have not given their lives to Jesus. I'm going to read you something. I'm going to read you a passage from the Bible, from God's Word. Okay, this is from Matthew 7. This is at the tail end of his Sermon on the Mount, which is the most famous sermon ever recorded, ever given. So bear with me. Listen closely to these words of what Jesus is saying. There's quite a few verses. Listen. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Basically what Jesus is saying, that there's a whole lot of priests out there, a whole lot of priests that pretend that they're God's chosen, but actually underneath they're very, very far from God. And the only way you can tell whether or not that they are actually sheep or wolves is by how they live their lives. So let me continue. So every healthy tree bears good fruit. Okay, those who are truly God's, they will bear good fruit. But the diseased tree bears bad fruit. Those fake priests, those fake, quote unquote, churchgoers. All right, they are bearing bad fruit. So a healthy tree, it cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a diseased tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, this is how you're going to recognize them. I'm going to recognize them by their fruits. So, remember what I just said? They'll be cut down and thrown into the fire. The fire, yes, that fire that is hell. For those who say that hell is not talked about in Scripture, here's one of the many instances that hell is definitely talked about in Scripture. Let me continue on. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day, the day, like I told you a couple stories back, then we all, when we die, we're going to stand before the throne of God. That's the day this is talking about. On that day, many will say to me, this is Jesus talking again, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? And did we not cast out demons in your name? And did we not do many mighty works in your name? Works. Did we not do? Trying to earn our way into heaven. Okay? And then this is what Jesus says. Then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. Okay? Final thing here, the last part of this is explaining, this is Jesus giving a more descriptive example of those who are truly walking with God, who are truly born again Christians, people who have given their lives to Jesus, and those who have not done it. Everyone then who hears these words of mine, the words I'm just reading to you right now, because this is Jesus' words recorded 2,000 years ago, and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. So those of you who were just, I just read, sorry, hold on. Basically what Jesus is saying, those of you who heed what I just said, who are the true believers, your life, it will be like a house built on a rock, okay? All houses are built on foundations now, right? This is obvious. This is easy stuff. And, okay, for those people who built their house on the rock, when the rain fell, as in like the trials of life, and the floods came, and those trials just kept going, and now we're flooding out our house, and the winds blew and beat on that house. However, it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock. The rock is Jesus. Those of you who built your life on the rock that is Jesus, when the trials of life come, you will withstand. You will not fall away. However, those who do not build their life on the rock that is Jesus, everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them, they will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand, and the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell. Last thing it says, and great was the fall of it. For those of you who are trying to earn your way to heaven, who are trying to do good deeds and be a good person, being all the societal and the cultural things that are constantly inundating us in this world right now, who think that that's all you need to do and you're going to be good with God. First, when you get there, when you get to heaven, when you die, you're going to find out you were wrong. But before you even get there, here in this life, on this earth, for those of you that suffer, who think that you're doing God's will, but you haven't built your life on Jesus, when those trials come in your life, you will not withstand. You will collapse. You will fall by the wayside, and that's going to be it. Great is that fall. So the last couple things I wanted to read this wraps up this chapter 7. And when Jesus finished these sayings, the previous 2 chapters, which were the entire Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus finished these sayings, the crowds were astonished at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one who had authority, not as their scribes. The scribes back then are the current day priests that we hear who are not building their life on the rock that is Jesus. We're building their life on societal concerns and cultural issues of this life. Jesus has the authority. Jesus' authority is in his word. Go to his word. The story that I thought was going to be short definitely went on longer than I thought because I got carried away with this. But please, don't, just because you're not a drug addict like I was, does not mean all is well. Search your heart. Ask God to see if there is any wicked way in you. Be humble. Humble yourself before God. Confess your sin. Admit that you're trying to earn your salvation by good works. There are going to be many, 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 many people who are having a very big shock waiting for them when they die. Okay, please don't be turned off by this. Don't be offended. Come back. Keep hearing what happens to me. I am not unduly preaching at you because I'm a holy roller Bible thumper. I'm preaching at you because I love you. This is true love. This is love winning out right here. Come back and hear what the love of Jesus can do in your life. Thank you, my friends. I'll talk to you later.